to episode 3 of the 5 Thread podcast, and what was a brilliant conversation with a fantastic guest, Ben Hardy-Jones, who is the sustainability lead at Desert Vipers. I was so happy to have Ben on because I think what they're doing at Desert Vipers is so inspiring for other sports organisations. In this conversation, we talk about a lot of things. This is actually Ben's first job. So we talk about actually the ability to just kind of go and do and try things, and that you don't necessarily have to have years of experience in the industry to make change. We talk about the opportunity to be allowed to fail, to try things and to iterate. We might not get it exactly right first time, but there's loads of lessons that we can learn. And we talk about our areas of control. So within sustainability and within our actions, what are the things that we can control and change? And if we put our focus there, then we can deliver massive results. It was a brilliant conversation, and Ben was a fantastic guest. And for anybody who is working in sustainability and is looking for some inspiration, please listen to the podcast and also reach out to Ben. He's very open about sharing what he's learned and the approach and the journey that they've been on. And I think there's loads of really powerful lessons that other organisations can take from this. So welcome to the 5 Thread podcast. I am super happy to have Ben Hardy-Jones with me. Ben, we have known each other kind of on and off for a couple of years. We've seen each other at conferences, and I, as Sport Positive, grabbed you and Matt, and I said I had to have you on because of the great work that you are really doing at Desert Vipers. So excited to kind of get into this conversation and talk about it. Before we do, could you give us an introduction about yourself and also about Desert Vipers?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, we've been speaking about this for a while, Matt and I, about getting on it. So thank you for inviting me, and hopefully it's an interesting listen for everyone. So I'm Ben Hardy-Jones. I'm the sustainability lead at Desert Vipers. Desert Vipers are a cricket franchise that play in the UAE's league, which is called the DP World ILT20. It's the second most watched T20 league in the world after the IPL, despite it only being 3 years old. And we're a new franchise, so we're trying to do things a little bit differently, which hopefully you'll come to sort of appreciate on this podcast. From myself, this is my first job, so it's quite an exciting opportunity. I think I bring hopefully a kind of fresh insight. Sports is all about giving young people a chance on the pitch. If you're good enough, you're old enough. And I'm delighted that Desert Vipers have translated that into the off-the-pitch staff as well. So I graduated from the University of Oxford about 18 months ago now, and I'm really loving working in sport and particularly at Desert Vipers.
I love that. I mean, my 2 things I've written down are that we do things differently, and this is your first job. And I wonder if those go hand in hand, almost that you didn't have the weight and barrier of experience. And so you just kind of run with these things. But to do that, you have to have a lot of freedom and a lot of trust from the organization. So before we start, I kind of wanted to dig into that, about it being your first job and how you have approached this, because what you've done is actually quite revolutionary within sports. You have really kind of done things differently, like you've said. But how has not having kind of that industry experience helped or hindered you?
I think it's been helpful because of the guidance that I've had. So I came into cricket having been to one match before at university, and it didn't involve much watching of the cricket. It was more socialising with friends. So actually I was quite sort of fresh to thinking what cricket was like. And often in sports and in many jobs, really, people say, this is how we do things because we've always done it that way. And I'd come in and thought, well, no, this is sort of not as efficient as it could be in my eyes. Maybe that came across as a bit annoying, which is where the guidance from Matt, who's the head of strategy at Desert Vipers, and Phil Oliver, the CEO, really has helped to make sure that my suggestions have been listened to and implemented in the correct way. And certainly, yeah, I think it's useful for any industry to get fresh insight in. But also, I'm a sports fanatic, so despite not having watched much cricket, I'm hugely interested now in the game and in how it works, because I'm interested in every sport, and cricket I just never really had the opportunity to watch compared to, say, tennis or football, etc. So yeah, I think being a sports fan doesn't necessarily isn't necessarily a bad thing, even if you're not like specific about one particular sport. I think it's probably a good thing in many ways.
Amazing. And I'm so glad you talked about that, because I'm a PhD student at Loughborough. Occasionally I lecture, and a lot of the students are always like, how do I get into this? You know, it's such a growing area, but they don't really know kind of where to start, because the roles are normally in like marketing or becoming an agent, those types of things, which are, you know, your traditional pathways. So how did you get into it, and kind of why did you choose Desert Vipers?
Well, I was approached by one of the alumni officers at Oxford, and he said, I've got an internship opportunity at a cricket team. And I looked at it and I thought, well, I don't really like cricket, so I'm not interested. But then I had another look, and I realised actually the opportunity to do something impactful through sports was too good to not apply for. So I applied. I then started in October 23, and I had a 6 month internship. And at the end of that, I was offered a full time role. And I think that structure is very useful for particularly people coming from university, young people. Sports is an industry where jobs are limited somewhat compared to other industries, particularly in sustainability. So that internship structure can allow organizations to have the confidence to know that this is a positive addition to your organization. And after the internship, hopefully they'll see that there's a full-time opportunity for that person.
Such a good point. And, you know, obviously within that internship, you definitely proved yourself, and you've gone on to really take some bold actions in what you've done at Desert Vipers. I wondered whether you could talk a bit more about that, about what you are doing differently.
Yes, there's a few things, and I think what we've chosen to date has been born out of the opportunities we have. So firstly, we're a franchise, which means that we don't control our stadium where we play the matches, which often is something that organisations focus on to begin with. So we can't make any tangible material changes there. We can influence them and suggest things, but at the end of the day, it's up to the venue. Another big area of our impact is flying, and the way the international cricket calendar works is there will always be players who are coming from other tournaments to us and then going from us to tournaments across the world. So we only have players for 5 weeks of the year, and we don't have the opportunity to really do anything over a long-term time period because they're with us for such a short period. So we decided to focus on things that we can control. And Matt Bailey decided in season 2 last year, just gone in 2023, 23-24, forgetting what year it is now. But we decided to become the first cricket team in the world to successfully eliminate single-use plastic water bottles from our team environment. And we did that through a partnership with an organisation called Blue Water, who are our official hydration partner. And we distributed these bottles to players, staff, and coaches. And through that, we didn't use any single-use plastic water bottles, and we saved 14,400 bottles across 5 weeks, which is a crazy figure. So we proved that that was possible, and we continued that partnership into the year that's just gone, season 3, in January this year. So that was really the big focus last year. And what that resulted in was we wanted to showcase that. So we produced a plastic impact report, which we believe is the first in sports to focus specifically on plastic. And when we were quantifying our plastic footprint, we realized that kit was a huge area of concern. So 94% of all the plastic we used in season 2 was in kit. So then we thought that's our focus for this season. So we worked with an organisation called PalmFit to become, we think, the first top tier cricket organisation to play a full season using fully recycled materials in our performance kit and off the pitch kit as well. So that was the focus for the season just gone. Now, we've done the two things we can control, which is water and kit to a large extent. We're looking at ground travel, things like that. But I think the next stage of the strategy around sustainability will be influencing policy and people and trying to work with stakeholders such as our team hotel, who we have a sustainability partnership with, JA Resorts in Dubai, and our stadium, the Dubai International Stadium, and hopefully the local government and other cricket organisations across the world.
Wow. I mean, I just want to check this figure. So you said 92% of plastic in season 2 was from kit. 94. That's crazy. And I think not a lot of people really do associate kit with plastic, but essentially that's what it is. And I also really loved when you talked about almost like your circle of control. And I think in sports, what we've seen is a real push to measure everything, particularly carbon. And it's all kind of become about a metric of, are we reducing our carbon, rather than actually thinking, well, within that, what are key areas that we're going to focus on? And I think it's been really smart to kind of take that kind of step by step and say, within the scope of water, what can we change? And what's out of our control in terms of our stadiums, we can influence, but we can't control it. So let's not kind of waste the effort there. And let's really kind of be quite laser focused on where we can have that impact. And I think it's been super smart. I think you've been particularly brave taking on kit. I've admired you and Matt from afar for a while, because I kept seeing you kind of turning up to all of these clothing conferences, and often, I'm from the world of fashion and sport, and neither of the two kind of mix at the trade conferences. And I'd see you and Matt. And I think that's why it's so interesting to me, is that you really did the due diligence. You didn't just pick a partner. You looked at, well, what is the landscape of this, and what are the complexities, and how do we, use what we can control to make change? So I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about that journey, because I'm sure it's been kind of one of ups and downs. How did you find it kind of taking this issue of kit?
I think the journey started just as I joined, really. So one of the huge problems with sports kits, obviously the kit itself is plastic, but it's always packaged in single-use plastic packaging traditionally. So the CEO, Phil Oliver, and Matt Bailey, they took the strategy, or they took the decision, just as I joined, really, that all of our fan jerseys in my first season, our second season as a franchise, would be packaged loosely. So we ordered 21,000 fan jerseys, which we distribute at the games, and it really helps build our brand. And seeing our kits around Dubai is an important way for us to build our brand in the first few years. And what currently happens is fans turn up, they get the kit, they take it out of the packaging. If they find a bin, great. If they don't, then you just have packaging littered around the stadium. So we thought, well, this doesn't really make sense, because it's not as if it's being bought from a store and it's being delivered. Like, there's absolutely no need for it. So we took that packaging out. It was 108 kilograms that we saved, 21,000 items. So you can imagine that just cumulatively adds up. So we really sort of started thinking about it then, I would say. And then once you look at packaging, you then think, well, what about the material itself? What about the recyclability at the end of life? And there's so many different elements of kit. It's so interesting. Fashion, sport and fashion, you say they don't go together very often, but they very much should do, because sport in many ways is fast fashion. So it's an opportunity to change that and really rethink what sports kit should be about, who you work with, and how you can make a difference. So that's when the journey started. Following the season, we took kits in from players. So I mentioned that they go off to other teams and they play for 6 or 7 teams a year sometimes. So they don't take all the kit that we give them, the playing kit, home with them. So we created an area in the team hotel. We put up cardboard boxes and just said, drop your used kit here. And we worked with Bat for a Chance, who are a UK-based charity. They're all over the world, where they distribute cricket kits to people who need it. And it's great to get people playing and giving them the equipment. So we worked with them to distribute that kit locally, and we made sure that we didn't send anything to landfill in the short term. And we got back, I don't know the numbers, but we got back several, dozen pieces of kit from lots of different players. So following on from that, we set ourselves the task of becoming the first team to play using the most sustainable materials at that point in time. We weren't sure what it looked like. So we went to this conference in Amsterdam where we met, and we really just were open to anything. We were looking at, can we use recycled materials? Can we use something like in the conference they were talking about capturing sort of crop residue and turning that into like corn type things and turning it into kit, and there were so many different options and we weren't sure which one we should take. And I think ultimately what it boiled down to was, what's feasible, what can we do the following year, because we wanted to make an impact straight away and then iterate from that, and then what was available to us in our market. So they're often, particularly because the conference was in Amsterdam, they were talking about these innovative projects in like Portugal, where they're taking algae off the coast and turning it into kit and all these kind of stuff. But in Dubai, it's might not have been feasible. So we wanted to see what was possible there. So I think yeah, the due diligence that we did was really helpful, because it just framed our understanding of what's possible. And then from there, we could then take sensible decisions that did have a tangible impact, and then we can iterate from then onwards.
And I think that will be so helpful for others hearing about that journey, because, a lot of people who are working in sports don't necessarily have a clothing background or a sustainability background. And you can go to these conferences and it almost be a bit overwhelming because of all the innovations, but you kind of think, well, how does that apply to us? There's sometimes a disconnect. And I think it's really great that you shared, yes, there is a lot of things out there, but is it right for us? And to show the bravery to be able to iterate within that process, to potentially say, this might not be the most perfect solution, but it's the best that we have right now. And we will continue to monitor that over time. I think that's a real sign of leadership, because in this space, a lot of people kind of say, I'm so worried about doing anything because of the fear of hypocrisy. Somebody might call it out and say it's not the best thing. And, if you've ever kind of been concerned about that, you've taken such bold actions, have you ever kind of worried about the repercussions of people kind of saying, well, you're doing this, but equally you're traveling or you are producing lots of kit?
A little bit, but I think less so than other organisations, because we're a franchise. So because there's fewer things that we can control, and that's where I think often people don't understand that anyway. So that's one challenge. We hosted a sustainability match and we invited sustainability professionals to come and see what we're doing. And they said, oh, why have you still got sort of plastic cutlery in the stadium? And I said, well, actually, we don't control the stadium, but we've asked for wooden for this match and it hasn't quite worked in the chain of, all those different communications. And they said, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know you don't own your venue. So one of the challenges is trying to convey what we can control and can't. But I think because we have fewer areas where, in many ways, you could say, well, to a Premier League football team, what are you doing about your stadium? What are you doing about fan travel, international games, things like that? We're a much smaller organisation. And so I think that's almost given us the confidence to do things, because there are fewer things to get right and we can get them right. So why don't we just do it, talk about it, hopefully inspire others to make those changes? And that's certainly one of the things we're trying to do with both water and kit. And the reason that we took those decisions is because they're available today. And hopefully by showing that it's possible, then we can encourage other organisations, bigger organisations, who by taking these steps will have a much better environmental sort of saving. Then I think that's sort of how we approach it, rather than worrying about being called out. And also I think we're in the Middle East, which is further behind its sustainability journey than Europe, but catching up rapidly. And I think that's almost an advantage to us, because we can hopefully sort of lead that charge, learn from the best parts in Europe and North America, and apply it to what's relevant to our region, and hopefully be positive about it rather than worrying too much.
And I'm smiling and nodding because it's like music to my ears, Ben. Like, I absolutely love it. because I do think kind of working in sustainability, it's a really hard job. There's a lot of people who get burnout because things can feel overwhelming. And I think what you're proving is, going back to what you said at the beginning, what can you control, and actually focus on that and do what you can and be prepared to iterate. And I think that's a huge lesson for all organizations listening to this, whether you're a grassroots club or a Premier League one. There's always something that you can do. Could you tell us about, the collaboration between you and your partner? How did you find the right partner to provide you with kit? How did that go? There's a lot of stakeholders within sport. You've kind of got to manage a lot of expectations. How did you kind of manage that relationship?
Yeah, this is a really interesting story because there's so many different elements when you think about kit. There's operations, there's materials, there's sponsorships and things like that. So we wanted to do something locally because once we realised that changing to recycled materials, we work with an agency called Carbon Happy World who provide us with support on taking decisions on carbon footprinting and that sort of thing. And they informed us that 51% would be the reduction number if we switch to recycled materials. Now, we're going to do a life cycle assessment this year to try and validate that on our specific example, but that was the figure we got. So we thought, well, that's a really high number. Let's take that decision because it seems like that's where the industry is at this moment in time. And can we choose someone local? And the reason we wanted to do something local is twofold, really. Firstly, in the UAE, there's a big push for supporting UAE businesses, as is in many countries around the world. So we wanted to use our presence on the ground to be a positive force within our own community. And secondly, we were told that the footprint is reduced by 8% by choosing local versus the traditional manufacturing hubs of India, China, and that part of the world. And actually, that worked out incredibly beneficially because so we worked with PalmFit, who are a UAE-based manufacturing, their apparel company. They have traditionally been in the gym space, so their kind of, I guess, athleisure wear is their forte, and this was their first foray into cricket. But actually, working with somebody locally on the ground, we have a team there as well. Fantastic members of the organisation who went and met the owner, Hanish Bhatt, and saw his factory, saw the processes, really tried to convey to him what we were looking for. Having that on-ground interaction was really beneficial from an operations perspective. So once we then did that and agreed that we'd work together, we then had 5 months in which to make sure that the kit come tournament was of a standard that professional cricketers, some of whom are the best in the world, can perform to their best ability in. So we were strategic in that we had a few development tournaments beforehand, and we entered a team and we worked with PalmFit to create a kit for this tournament. From that, we then iterated. So over a 5-month period, the quality of the kit improved massively. And I think often in sports, people who I've spoken to in other industries, they're looking at purchasing kit providers for 3 years down the line. And we just sort of fast forwarded that whole process. And it was quite daunting. Our operations manager asked so many really, really important questions that come the season was very useful to make sure that we had plans in place. We had a plan A, B, and C. One of the issues with sports kit is sponsoring. So actually, what was the cut-off time to produce the kit to get the sponsors on? And actually, by choosing a manufacturer that was local and used print-on-demand methods, we had a turnaround time of 2 days. So we could, in theory, have a sponsorship deal signed off 2 days before our first match, which was beneficial because it gave the commercial team more time to make the sponsorship deals. And it was perhaps not beneficial for the operations team because they were sort of like, what's going on? Like, do we need to close? When can we make this decision? But actually, having that local aspect was really I think, a benefit, not just from a footprint perspective, but operations as well. And obviously, we were able to invite Hanish to all of our matches, and I think it was a very proud moment for him, particularly in the final, to see his logo on the kit, and players just absolutely loved it. I think they performed better than last year, which is the first sort of tick in the box. So yeah, I think overall it was a good success for our first year.
And what I hear from that is this real idea of partnership. I think within sports, because there are a lot of stakeholders, and often, like, a sports organization goes to a brand, and then that brand looks after everything, and they might never know which factory it's made in. Often, there's just not that transparency. Whereas, I'm hearing it was very much a partnership and a collaboration, and there was a lot of like pride, like you say, at that last match, to actually see something that you'd all worked on together, rather than what often happens is quite an unequal relationship that is just kind of based around price, where it's a negotiation of how cheap a kit can be. And I think there's so many interesting elements that you talked about, that flexibility of being able to take those big commercial decisions quite late in the day was so important, and when we think about this commercial model, we often get caught up and kind of say, well, potentially this is a great model for you, but there's no way we could apply it elsewhere because we need to order our kit so far in advance for the price. But actually you gained potentially a lot of flexibility and a lot of, commercial opportunity by having that flexibility in terms of when you take decisions around sponsorship. And I think that's a really key lesson for people to think about as well. And also the transparency of actually knowing where your product is made. I think a lot of people don't realize that actually factories are outsourced a lot of the time. We don't often know about working conditions. Audits can be faked. So when we know actually, somebody from your team has been to that factory, there's a really clear line back. And I think that kind of goes back to the due diligence that you approached this with, that it wasn't something where you just said, okay, we're going to do this and we'll outsource it to somebody. You really kind of monitored it every step of the way. And I liked the idea of, how you'd conducted that process, that it was a test and refine. You didn't just get that first kit and say, yeah, this is fine, we'll go with it. Or no, like, this isn't what we expected, let's drop the idea. It was, the iteration of, okay, well, let's have that discussion. Let's ask the questions. Let's see how we can improve. And I think that is really important, and something that actually not only works locally, but best works locally. You don't have that disconnect of being halfway around the world. So yeah, some really valuable lessons there, Ben.
Yes.
Do you think there were any challenges or things that you didn't expect that came up, and how did you deal with that?
There were a few challenges, and I think one of them was operational. So when we did a few stickers, because this was the first time, and we're using sort of glue, which is I can't quite remember what it was, but we're trying to use the best in everything. So we use like water-based dyes, and the stickers that we put on, we're trying to make sure that they were kinder to the environment. And when we went through the washing cycle, because you're in a hotel, and in a hotel they wash and tumble dry, what we found was in one of the matches, one of the stickers was coming off one of the players. So then we took the decision that actually going forwards, we should be looking at sublimation, because there's only, you can't, in a match that's televised to millions of people around the world, it doesn't look good if a sponsor's sticker is coming off. But actually, that was a learning process. And I think that's important to share, that there's a decision that you take, practical versus sort of environmental. Some people say sublimation is worse. Some people say stickering is worse because then you can't recycle it. Actually, in reality, that debate sort of, in many ways, doesn't matter too much, because at this moment in time, the technology, you need to have things which look pristine. And also, if they look pristine and high quality, then you incentivize and encourage other organizations to adopt the same approach as you. So we wanted to look the best out of any of the teams in our league. And that's something where I think having that sustainability partnership with our hotel is really valuable, because already looking ahead to next year, which is going to be later on in the year in January. We are looking at taking over a section of the laundry facility to have our designated kit washed in that. And we're also looking at adding microplastic filters to the laundry machines. So having that partnership between here's the team that wears the kit, here's the manufacturer where it's produced 50 miles down the road, and here's our team hotel where it's washed. If you look at the life cycle of the kit, that's nearly everything. And the final piece of the jigsaw is we're looking at recycling our kit locally. So there's been the first cotton recycling plant opened in the UAE a few months ago. I've been to visit it, and now I've looked at that. Then we're thinking, can we take decisions around should the kit that I'm wearing at the moment, the polo, should that be cotton? So then we can actually recycle it, because there isn't a local polyester recycling facility. So you would have to go and verify that if you went abroad. So I think the challenge is we're really to try and align those different dimensions, and as the, I guess, sort of supply, as the consumer in all of those cases, hold those different parts to account and to try and get them to work with us and to communicate together. So I think that's something that's quite exciting. But certainly in our first year, we did have some challenges around the stickers, but going forwards, it's something that we've looked at and addressed. So hopefully we won't have those challenges again.
And, I always say, the most frequent question I get asked is, what is the best material to make a garment from? And my question, I always kind of say it's a bit like, how long is a piece of string? Because what does that garment need to do? And my point of view is, the most unsustainable garment you can make is one that's not fit for purpose. And you've exactly said that in terms of, yes, we could have gone for a more sustainable option, but it's not fit for purpose. If it fails on the pitch and it doesn't perform and it doesn't look good, that's not a sustainable decision. And actually, we have to be very practical in all of this, and we have to think, for that player, does this perform, and does this represent, the quality that we want to show to our sponsors? And so I think it's so good that you kind of have been on that journey, and to be involving all of the different parts of partners that you work with who interact with this kit. I think, to be involved in your hotel is such a smart move. Potentially not a lot of people know how intense the laundering of team kit is. And often that is why some sports organizations give their players a new kit every time, because it is quite intense in terms of how it's laundered and with all the travel that goes on, and being laundered in different hotels each time you travel. So many different points that people can look at there. And I think it just shows the holistic view that you've taken with this. And earlier on, you mentioned Bat for a Chance. Like, I had no idea that you were collaborating with them. And I think it just shows, even if you don't have that perfect solution, you can just collect back your kit. You can provide the player with an opportunity to give it back if they're not going to use that. And there are organizations like Bat for a Chance who are crying out for decent kit to be able to give it to somebody who really does want to play, but potentially can't afford to. And I think when we remove those economic barriers to sport, we allow more people to participate. And I think that's what most people want. Not only is it environmental good, it's social impact as well. So I think big ticks kind of along the way there, Ben. We've talked a lot about the supplier partnership and how it worked internally. I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the fan, about how they've received some of the sustainability initiatives that you've done. What's the response that you've had?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because our league is very different to most leagues. So firstly, we're a new league, so the fan base is growing. Most of our fans of the team are actually international. So we've got a huge fan following in Pakistan and India. And so sort of on the ground, they're not involved in our sustainability initiatives and sort of, being able to touch and feel them, that kind of thing. So there's a couple of things that we did. Firstly, we've created dedicated social media platforms and a sustainability microsite to showcase our story in more detail, so that even if you're not on the ground in Dubai, you can understand a little bit what we're doing. You can feel a part of it. We've got sections on there where you can write to us, and we're trying to make it as inclusive as possible. And I think the the kit donation is something that's really an opportunity to reach fans on the ground. So at the start of the year, we collected kit back from previous years. So I brought back a few items, so did some of the team members, and we handed those out to people playing street cricket. And they were just over the moon with the kit. And there was a great opportunity to do something positive and give back. And we stood and watched them play for about 15 minutes after we dropped the kit off. And they're really, really good sort of street cricket level. And I think just wearing the kit, they sort of were really happy about that. So on terms of the match day, we try and do a few things. So all the kit that we hand out this year is made from plastic bottles from the same system that fans used to recycle last year. So in our stadium, the Dubai International Stadium, it's the largest cricket facility in the Middle East. We put plastic recycling bins in there for the first time last year. They didn't have them before. And we said, well, let's use our sustainability match. Operationally, we knew it would be fine, but often you have to convince them and just give a trial opportunity. So we did that during our sustainability match. Everyone realised it was a great solution. So then the bins were in place for a further few matches last year. And this year they have been in all venues for all matches. So we worked with a local organisation called D-Grade for those bins. And then we purchased some kits from them this year to hand out to fans. So they were sort of part of that story of, if they came the previous year, they might have had, even though it's 11 months apart, it's not the same plastic bottles, but it's the same system. So I think that was really nice to communicate with them. One of the challenges, of course, is language. So we're communicating primarily in English, but lots of our fans are from regions of the world where that isn't their first language. So I think trying to make things as graphic as possible in terms of using emojis and signs and things is helpful. And I think the culmination of our efforts were centered around our sustainability match, where we went green for the day. Players wore green. We handed out green kits. And we really tried to use that as a focal point for partnership activations and messaging around sustainability, both on social media and at the ground. So I know the Premier League are doing something similar with the Green Football Weekend. I think having a focus to really allow you to go and make these big, bold messaging and impacts within the community is helpful. Funny story, actually, we this year, instead of having a cardboard box for players to drop kit off, we got a wheelie bin. We put messaging on the side, tried to make it more formal and make it look more professional, and that resulted in increased uptake. So we had loads of items, a lot more donated this year. We're currently sort of calculating that. But we took the wheelie bin to the stadium for one match, for the sustainability match, and we put it in the fan zone. And we didn't have anyone guarding it. And I went up to the bin just before the first ball, and one of the stadium operatives had put a black bin bag in there, and people had started putting rubbish in. So this bin was designed for fans to come and drop kit off at previous matches, much like Green Football Weekend are doing this week. But actually, that doesn't work in our region of the world. And I later found out that you can't actually ask for people to drop things off without giving them in return. Now, one of the things that we did do, if people had dropped them off, was enter them into a prize draw and offer a free kit in return. So we would have been fine with that. But it just shows, some things that work in Europe don't necessarily work in our region of the world. And I think that's both insightful, but also a bit scary as well, because you have to plough your own furrow. You have to try things across a whole range of different dimensions and then choose the ones which work in your region. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson from our kit story in total, is trying different things, working out what's right for us, and then just going and actually doing it.
Yes. I'm a bit speechless, Ben, because I think I've mentioned it before, but the two words that come to mind are bravery and leadership. And I know that you work very closely with Matt and Phil. The trust that they have in you to almost allow you to fail, to say, actually, try all these things, Ben. They might not all work 100%, but we have to learn the lessons, is so powerful, and I think not a lot of people potentially get that freedom. They're kind of given the permission that they can do a sustainability projects, but the expectation of that being a success is often so high that it becomes incredibly difficult to achieve. And I think, it comes back to actually, these are really practical things that you've tried. And some of them, yes, it worked brilliantly. And some of them you've kind of had to rethink, that wasn't appropriate for you in your region. But you didn't, as a team, see that as a failure. You saw that as a learning. And I think that's so important.
Exactly, yeah. And we almost took it like it was quite funny in many ways, that they had, because it was a black bin that we purchased for the kit, and it did have messaging on the side for the kit donation. But then that just shows next year maybe we should choose a different colour bin if we are to do that, because black bins have connotations of putting a black bin bag in and throwing your rubbish in. So we just thought this is like really funny because we've tried something, it hasn't worked, and you could get upset about it, but actually looking at things in a positive light and then just learning from it, I think is really helpful. And the leadership from Phil and Matt and even the rest of the team, I think we're all on the same page in how we approach things and trying things, failing, being open about failing as well, because ultimately what we would like to do is encourage other people to join us on the journey. And so if we can say, actually, the stickers didn't quite work this way, you should do it this way if you are to join us, hopefully that will encourage other people to come forwards and take these actions as well.
I think it definitely will. And I think we need to hear more of this, Ben. Like, I've loved this conversation because you have been so open and in some ways so vulnerable because, we both go to a lot of the sports conferences and it tends to be a message of here's our annual report, here's our reduction in carbon, haven't we done a great job? And I think we need to hear more stories about actually there's a lot that is out of our control, but here's what is in our control and here's what we've done about it and here's what we've tried and failed and here's how we've mitigated that. And I think it's, some of it kind of feels like common sense, but often in business, common sense isn't always front and center. It's often driven by things like, is this going to make us money? Is this going to look good on a sustainability report? And earlier in the conversation, you talked about convincing. When you were talking about the plastic bins, almost you had to convince them to put them in the stadium. And it sounds within your team, like with Matt and Phil, you're all on the same page and you have very aligned values. But for anybody who's working in an organization where they are having to sell the idea of sustainability in, have you got any tips on how you can convince other people to take a risk and to try new things?
I think leading by example is the best thing that you can do. What I try and do in my own personal case is when I'm buying products and things, I'm trying to sort of live by what I preach in many ways. So a great example is I've got shoes which are made of orange peel waste. And I told one of the players this, and now this player is not fussed at all about sustainability, but he said to me, "Oh, that's actually really cool, Ben. I really like that." And I think trying to make things, especially in sports, trying to make them cool, trying to lead by example, to show what is possible and spin it in a positive light as well. This can make you money. This can save you money. If we go all in, then here's what the benefits will be. Doing your research beforehand, making sure that what you implement will be successful to get the rest of the team on board, I think are all things that hopefully other people can, many of whom are already doing this, but I think just those things would stand people in good stead, I think.
Definitely. I always, I know it's my job to ask the questions, so I've got a list here, but I'm always quite gobsmacked with my guests because I feel so lucky to be able to have these conversations with you, because I do think, the lessons that you have learned through this, some of them are quite hard won. And I find it so insightful when you do share all of this information, because I think it really will help other organizations. And just kind of thinking ahead, how do you see the future of sport, and what would you like other sports organizations to kind of take from the work that you're doing at Desert Vipers?
I think sports needs to be more transparent with everybody involved. So the plastic impact report is a great example of that. We both thought, well, you said at the start, you wouldn't think of plastic as being involved in kit. And actually, by showcasing that it is, then you can take those decisions. So being transparent, laying everything on the table, I think you'll win fans that way, because if you lose a cricket match incredibly badly, then if the head coach comes out and says, "Oh, we played really well," then all the fans would think that's not true. And I think the same is correct of sustainability. If you say, "Oh, we're performing really well," and you hide different things in your report, and you don't include fan jerseys and fan travel and all these different things that organisations often don't include, I think people aren't stupid. They clock onto that kind of stuff. So by being transparent, you can then take actions. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I would like to see the sports industry do. And ultimately, it's got a huge power, so it should be unleashed and for the benefits of people and the planet.
100%. 100%. And kind of just before we close, what's next for Desert Vipers? I know you were talking about influencing policy and people at the start. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, so we've written some sustainability in sport guidelines, which mainly are region specific, but we're looking at how we can best share those out at this moment in time. What's the best platform for us? So that's quite exciting. We've got our life cycle assessment for our kit, which is an iteration of what we've done last year. We've got a 3-year partnership with PalmFit. That's another thing. Long-term partnerships, really useful when it comes to sustainability, because you can do things immediately in year one and then just continually improve. So we're really fortunate to be working with PalmFit on that. And I think the next stage is probably an updated sustainability strategy. We've done one for the first 3 years of our organisation. Things have changed now. The world's changed slightly. So what do the next 5 years look like? And really trying to map out where we can make a positive impact.
Well, we will definitely watch this space, Ben. Just before we finish, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wish that I had, or anything you want to say before we close?
I think there was one thing, and when we're talking, you mentioned before about if it doesn't work, it's not sustainable. And I think too often there is a misconception that performance kit has to be the same as fan kit and has to be the same as staff kit. Now, we approach all of those three things differently. So our fan kit that we distributed at the game didn't have sponsors, which meant that we could hand it out and place the order nice and early and make sure that everything operationally was right. Because in our region, it doesn't make sense. The TV sponsorship is the most important thing. And I think the same thing is for staff. So often, and I'm thinking of Formula One here, you have about 1 million different sponsors on a shirt, and if one changes, you've got to change it. Now, that might be important for a driver, but for somebody who's working in the factory, it's probably not important. So I've got a hat here, which is our playing cap. This is Lockie Ferguson's from last year that he left. You can see it's got our sponsorship with JA and Drink Dry on the side. Now, I hope that we have these two sponsors next year, but it would be incredibly optimistic to think that it would be the same sponsors in exactly the same locations. Maybe they'll be in a different location. Hopefully they'll want to partner with us again. But just in case they don't, we didn't hand this hat out to our staff. So our staff have a plain hat, just the Vipers logo on the front, same design. Now, what that means is that we can use that hat over multiple years. And so you can reduce the amount of materials that you have to purchase. So over personalization on items which don't need personalizing, I think, is a final message that I think the sports industry as a whole could look at itself in a different way, and then utilize that space for different things, make money from different sponsorships from different places and do it in long-term deals, and just critically looking at every item and why it's made and why it's important, I think can really add and reduce demand overall.
I think that's brilliant. And I think, you're saving the cost there of potentially thousands of staff uniform items that don't need to be changed every year. Like we've kind of said throughout this, some of this is like it's practical common sense. It's about really looking at what you can control within your organization and kind of saying, does this make sense to us? Should we be kind of buying new uniforms for everybody every year because the sponsor changes? Potentially not. Let's look at actually where the visibility for those sponsors needs to be. And if it's not inside a factory, let's try and do things differently. Having different approaches for those kind of different end uses, I think is really, really important. And I don't want to put you on the spot here, Ben, but I do feel like you are an oracle and a leader within your own right within this. So if anybody wants to know more, how can they find out? Do they reach out to you? Is there sustainability statements they can read?
Yes, certainly. My inbox is always open to anyone that wants to learn more. I'm sure Matt Bailey would say the same. We've got a really good microsite where we've got case studies on each of our different partnerships. So please feel free to go and delve in there at desertvipers.com, and then there's a sustainability tab microsite. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, and be very, very happy to chat, share learnings, and hopefully encourage you to adopt Blue Water and PalmFit as well, because I think they're fantastic solutions that every sports team should be using right now.
Amazing. Ben, thank you so much. It's been an education. I've absolutely loved it. And I'm sure we're going to hear more from you in the future in terms of how you have influenced people. I think that's going to be so interesting, because almost you're going outside of that circle of control into influencing and into policy and into affecting other stakeholders. And almost it's a different set of skills doing that. So it'd be fabulous to kind of have you back, in a few seasons' time to see how you've got on with that as well. But for today, I just want to say thank you so much. And, thanks also to the team. I know Matt and Phil work incredibly hard as well to make these changes happen. Thanks for being on the podcast, and look forward to the next one.
No, thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.